Disclaimer, I know next to nothing about NASCAR. Please don't flame a Reno.
Hey everybody, it's Aiden here once again, and welcome back to another edition of Storytime, where I ditch the virtual world of motorsport to look at the weird, wonderful, wacky, and sometimes outrageous stories from the real world of motorsport. Now, off the back of my previous video, which was me attempting to survive 20 laps of Daytona as part of Daytona Week, I thought I'd scour the internet to see which of the many races in Florida every February was considered to be the greatest. And all the articles I've read keep singling one out: the 1997 Daytona 500. The Daytona 500, as its name suggests, is a 500-mile long or 805-kilometer NASCAR race held at Daytona International Speedway in the United States, which is in America. Two races are held at Daytona every year, one for the 500 and the second, the Coke Zero 400, which takes place in the summer months. It is also one of three held in Florida, with the two Daytona rounds and the championship showdown at Homestead in Miami. The 500 is regarded as the most prestigious event on the NASCAR calendar, and has by far the biggest prize pot. Weirdly, the 500 is also the opening round of the season, as opposed to being the season finale such as the FA Cup Final or the Super Bowl, or being held mid-season like the Indy 500, the Bathurst 1000 or the Monaco Grand Prix. This is almost unique in any sport, as I'm struggling to find any other sport that has its biggest event at the start. But I guess you could say you should start with a bang. Due to its importance to the NASCAR calendar, the race is often referred to as the Super Bowl of stock car racing, a term that will sound weird to people on my side of the pond, given that what we call stock cars are those dirt oval races that only have two gears. In fact, it's one of the few times American English actually makes sense, along with the American past tense for dive being dove instead of dived, or manslaughter being called negligent homicide. Getting back to the subject at hand, the Daytona 500 is one of 6 so-called superspeedways to host a NASCAR event, along with Michigan, Fontana, Indianapolis, Pocono, and Talladega. And like Tally, races at Daytona require the mandatory use of a restrictor plate, since at both Tally and Daytona, laps are taken at full throttle. In 2004, Rusty Wallace tested a Sprint Cup car at Daytona with the plate removed. While he expressed excitement at hitting 228 miles an hour, the same speeds Formula 1 cars hit at Monza, he later said, "There's no way we'd be able to pack race at those speeds." However, the use of a restrictor plate does add to the show at Daytona. The cars follow much closer and will circle each other to try and build a gap using the slipstream. Bump drafting will be used to give the car ahead a bit of a straight line boost, and Darrell Waltrip liked racing with them because instead of just tuning an engine for a ton of horsepower, drivers now had to find a way of actually having to drive round each other. In addition, the 2010 edition of the 500 saw 87 official on-track lead changes. Now I know what you're thinking, if only F1 could do that. It won't happen. F1 cars are not stock cars. The 39th running of the Great American Race was held on the 16th of February 1997, about 3 weeks after the Daytona 24-hour endurance race. Temperatures were cool at around 17 degrees Celsius with winds blowing around 23 miles an hour. Among the storylines for the event were the "Is it finally Dale's year" speculation, with Earnhardt's now 19-year-long quest for the 500 beginning to sound like Liverpool's chase for that elusive first Premier League title. Earnhardt would have the most dominant car nearly every year, only for the number 3 Goodwrench Chevy to have some sort of mishap. It would either blow up, get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or get overtaken about half a mile from the finish. But still, the man in black had the same optimism he had every year, given his Chevrolet Monte Carlo was among the fastest in the field. There was also the fact that 2 people on the front row were not your usual household names when it came to oval racing. Mike Skinner was on pole, and alongside him was Steve Grissom. Who? Exactly. Mike Skinner, who I'm pretty sure was the daft brummie that sang "Dry Your Eyes Mate," was the inaugural Camping World Truck Series winner with Richard Childress Racing. He would do gopher work and earn his way into doing part-time racing for Childress on the West Coast, before eventually making his way into NASCAR. As a side note here, gopher work is an Australian term where the young up-and-comers would not just turn up and drive the cars and have everyone wipe their arse, they would actually work on the cars to get their hands dirty, even do jobs such as wash the boss's car, the boss's wife car, and so on. Same way that kids in the football academies in England used to clean the dressing rooms, polish the first team players' boots, and basically be told, you earn your way into this dressing room, you don't enter unless you're cleaning it or you're playing. You know, having to pay their dues and stuff. They don't let them do it anymore. Apparently it's classed as child labour. No wonder too many young sportsmen these days think they're God's gift. They've had their hands held too much. Grissom, meanwhile, was the case of a decent driver with a modicum of talent, but he always ended up at mid-grid teams at best in the Cup Series. He'd won the Nationwide Series, which is essentially NASCAR's GP2, but now he'd managed to get his break driving for the Hendrick Motorsports 41 Kodak car for the 1997 season. Put simply, this guy was the Nico Hulkenberg of NASCAR. As well as Earnhardt, the focus was largely on the two Labonte brothers, Terry and Bobby. Terry because he was the defending NASCAR champion, and also because his car was now painted to look like a box of cornflakes. Bobby was watched because he, like Earnhardt, was chasing a Daytona win, and because Joe Gibbs Racing had switched from the Monte Carlo to the Pontiac Grand Prix. But in the middle of these big names and who the hell are these two kids on the front row, was a 25-year-old from Vallejo, California by the name of Jeffrey Gordon.
Jeff.
Gordon wasn't exactly nobody. He'd won the 1995 Cup Series and is often the name thrown around when people ask why Earnhardt started punting people off the track to win. I mentioned the fact that Earnhardt didn't start punting people until Gordon showed up in the Death of Dale Earnhardt storytime that you can watch by clicking the link at the top right of your screen. Like Earnhardt, Gordon had yet to win the Daytona 500. Gordon was among the favourites for the win. He'd had a strong 1996, but the number 24 DuPont Chevrolet had a nasty habit of blowing up. Much like Earnhardt's car, come to think of it. I see a pattern emerging here. Don't buy a Chevy, people, get a Ford. The 24 car ran into issues before any on-track action had started. When the NASCAR officials put the templates on to make sure the car was fully legal and matched NASCAR's exact dimensions, they discovered that the team had made the rear bumpers slightly wider and given it corners to create the illusion that it was the correct size. Out came the angle grinders, and they trimmed the bodywork down to the correct size. Well, I say they trimmed it, they sanded it down slightly and then bashed it with a hammer to make sure it fit and then blew it back up again. The problems continued on track. Gordon could only manage 26th fastest when he finally hit the track to do his qualifying runs to determine the grid for the qualifying race. Yeah, I don't get it either. And Earnhardt was 9th fastest. Dale Jarrett's 88 car was fastest, lapping the course in just over 48 seconds. So, Gordon's team in Hendrick Motorsports and Dale's team in Richard Childress Racing start the usual, they've got more horsepower, they got illegal engines, they got illegal aero. You know, just to take the sense off the fact that your car's shit. The Rainbow Warriors could not understand where everyone else was getting their speed from. And when Gordon went out to start his qualifying run to determine the grid for the second of the 125-mile qualifying races, it began to rain, and Billy Stanbridge smashed up his 78 car. This was an issue since Gordon had already built up speed and was in qualifying trim, meaning the engine was running hotter than the team would have liked. It was only supposed to run for the 2 hot laps of the track. When Gordon brought it in, the engine was running at 260 degrees Fahrenheit and on the edge of exploding. Is that hot? Is that hot? The only thing they could do was chuck another one in. He eventually qualified 22nd. Earnhardt was 10th. I've already talked about how Daytona works. The cars have restrictor plates and that limits how fast the cars are going. You can go back and listen to that bit if you want to. Who knows, maybe you'll trigger a couple of mid-roll ads. But the important thing to remember here is that 22nd in a NASCAR race is not the back of the field as it would be in Formula 1 or most other touring car series. It's the middle of the pack. If you watch my video I did the other day in NASCAR Racing 2003, running mid-pack in a restrictor plate race like at Tally or Daytona is the scariest thing you'll ever do in sim racing. If you're at the back, you can anticipate a wreck and avoid it. If you're at the front, it's going to happen behind you. Mid-pack, there's every chance that if a wreck happens, you're going to be in it. And this wasn't for the actual 500 either. This was just a qualifying race. It's really just the dress rehearsal for the main event and the best practice sessions so you could learn about fuel, tyres and other things while running in traffic. In the second qualifying race, Gordon found a way to get the best launch off turn 4 into the tri-oval, which is ridiculous because I just looked at a map of Daytona and there's only 3 corners. And he managed to finish in such a way that he would start 6th for the actual 500. For most of the second race, Gordon was behind Dale and looking for ways to intimidate the Intimidator. He finished 2nd. It seemed then that Gordon's car was improving with every session, or that the weather was getting better. Nobody knew what was going on. Or so they thought. In the final practice session, Gordon was complaining that the car hadn't got any power at low revs, and as soon as it hit around 6k, it took off. Despite all this, crew chief Ray Evernham felt confident that the 24 car could win the 500. The Daytona 500 is one of those races you never know who is going to win. While in Formula 1 the race will be won by one of the top 3 teams barring a stroke of luck where all 6 of the front runners are taken out, at Daytona you just don't know. Like Mount Panorama, the track decides who will win the trophy at the end. You can have the fastest car in NASCAR history, but if you bin it or it explodes as Earnhardt kept finding out every year, some guy you've never heard of could be standing in winner's circle when the day is over. The race itself got off to a clean start. Mike Skinner led the way for the first lap, but Earnhardt's number 3 was too much for him to handle. The crowd erupted as the Intimidator went into the lead. 9 green flag laps followed before Robert Presley's number 29 Scooby-Doo car, as part of a spot to do with Cartoon Network, memories, decided to try and launch itself into orbit after spinning at turn 2. The rear got so much air that the car did a twirl on its nose before landing on all 4 wheels again. The Romanian judge awarded him a 9.2. Earnhardt led from lap 2 to lap 50, enjoying the lead of what was turning out to be a rather tame Daytona 500. While the 3 car led the race, Skinner dropped back into the teens while Gordon, Bill Elliott and Mark Martin made their way forwards. Trouble reared its head on lap 47 when Jimmy Spencer, Derek Cope and Jeff Bodine tangled on the back straight to bring out the second caution. Spencer's number 23 Camel Cigarettes Ford Thunderbird had suffered a cut tyre and slammed into the retaining wall as well as Bodine's car. Cope tried to avoid it, but ended up in the collision, completely destroying his Skittles Pontiac. Given there were so many green flag laps between the cautions, pit strategy was the order of the day. But Earnhardt's crew, nicknamed the Flying Aces, were not as on the ball as they normally were. When racing resumed on lap 43, Michael Waltrip, the 2001 500 winner, was in the lead until Ernie Irvan decided he was going to lead and moved his Texaco car up to the front. That was, until Gordon decided it was his turn, using the inside line to get his Chevy into the lead. Despite not having anywhere near the best or fastest car, the 25-year-old led the next 33 laps. On lap 90, another crash happened between Ken Schrader and Steve Grissom, and in the pit stop chaos, Greg Sachs took the lead. Gordon had a lug nut problem and Earnhardt had another bad stop. When the race resumed on lap 93, Sachs got past like no tomorrow before another brief caution for debris on lap 97. For the next 34 laps it went calm again before the biggest card of the race was played. Gordon tried to draft Ricky Craven into the lead, but he ran over a piece of debris in turn 1. He pitted to change the right side tyres in a 10-second stop, and his team's major worry was how the hell he was going to get out of the pit lane in front of the leaders and be on the lead lap. It was one of those moments. How much of a big deal would it have been if Gordon went a lap down? It's almost like Schumacher in the 2004 Ferrari getting lapped by a Jordan. The biggest player eradicated. Just like that. Fortunately for Gordon, Sachs and Jeff Burton tangled, and Gordon was in the right place at the right time as he had indeed crossed the line ahead of the leader and was on the lead lap. Jeff closed up at the back of the pack and when the race restarted, got a stomp on to pass the slower cars ahead. When the race resumed, it was pretty much a cert that a Ford of some description would win, until a piece of aluminium found its way onto the track. Sorry, aluminum. So, another round of pit stops. Some drivers took all 4 tyres, some took fuel and 2 tyres, and some just fuel. Somehow Gordon ended up in 4th, before taking Sterling Marlin for 3rd. On lap 190, getting up close to the action of Daytona took on a whole new meaning. As Gordon set up for a pass on Earnhardt for 2nd, Earnhardt got a push with Gordon's car getting the number 3 loose on exit. The Goodwrench Chevy crashed into the wall with no contact from anyone else, and then hit Dale Jarrett, which caused Earnhardt's car to roll over. While on its roof, it was then hit by Ernie Irvan's car with the Ford's bonnet flying into the crowd and injuring a few spectators. Earnhardt was put in an ambulance to be checked for injuries, but while inside he noticed his car still had all 4 wheels on it. He got out of the ambulance, had his car dropped off the tow truck, started it up and drove it back to the pits. The race resumed with 6 to go. Gordon stuffed it down the inside of Bill Elliott at turn 1, and Terry Labonte and Ricky Craven, Gordon's teammates, also went past to make it a Hendrick Motorsports 1-2-3. The 3 Hendrick cars held off the chasing cars before the big one happened behind them, wiping out 13 cars. Bobby Hamilton, who was drafting his number 43 STP Pontiac just outside the top 10, got a bit careless and made contact with Johnny Benson's Pennzoil entry. All hell broke loose, and the transition from turn 4 into the front stretch became a scene out of Days of Thunder. Jarrett would get involved in his second wreck of the race, finding himself the helpless victim when Kenny Wallace inadvertently drove his Square D Ford into the Quality Care car, severely damaging both of them. Benson's car was hit multiple times by Joe Nemechek, Lake Speed and others, while the drivers in the mid-pack had nowhere to escape. When the smoke cleared up, 13 cars were collected in the mayhem. NASCAR was left with a no-win situation. The mess in turn 4 was too much to clean up in just 3 laps. Since this was before the period of the green and white checkered policy that became the norm in 2004, the race ended under a caution flag period. Hendrick Motorsports staged a formation finish, much to the annoyance of all the Dale Senior fans in attendance, and finished 1-2-3 behind the safety car. Gordon, as a result, became the youngest ever 500 winner at 25, until Trevor Bayne won at age 20 in 2011. Before this race, no team had ever scored a 1-2-3 in any NASCAR race. As soon as Gordon entered victory lane, he was handed a mobile phone so he could talk to Rick Hendrick, the team owner, who was unable to be at the race because he was receiving treatment for leukemia. Away from the celebrations, Earnhardt criticised Gordon, saying he was too impatient, as if Gordon had tipped it out. But despite the squabbling between Jeff and Dale fans, both sides would probably agree that the 1997 race was one of the best 500s of all time. Earnhardt would finally win the race at the 20th attempt the following year, before ultimately being killed at the exact same track in 2001, which I have covered previously. A car that was not the best had won the race, albeit behind the safety car, and the race was won through grit, teamwork and a little bit of luck, as well as being totally unpredictable. The full 1997 race is on YouTube along with other Daytona 500s, and just a simple search will find it. Jeff Gordon not only won the season opener but went on to win the 1997 NASCAR title. He repeated that feat in 1998 and 2001 to become a 4-time champion, and has since gone down in history as one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. So this has been the full story of the 1997 Daytona 500. If you are going to be watching the race this year, let me know in the comments, and as always, if you like the video, show your appreciation by giving this video a thumbs up, and if you do want to see more, click the subscribe button with the notification bell on. Also, if you want to support my channel on a more personal level, you can do so by donating to my Patreon. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Adam Millward, and until next time, have a great day wherever you live in the world. Goodbye.